Good morning, hello and welcome to another webinar with me, Sophie. I am a maths tutor and founder of Tutor in a Box, and today we're going to be going through trigonometry. Hopefully you've already gone through the Pythagoras webinar and you understand that the magic formula for that is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and that Pythagoras is used in right angled triangles and when we're looking at side lengths only. We're going to move on today to the topic of trigonometry, and trigonometry is where we are using sine, cosine and tan, and it links two sides and an angle, okay? The big difference between Pythagoras and trigonometry is that it now involves an angle, okay? So that might be the angle that's 32 degrees or 64 degrees, but there's another angle. The similarities between trigonometry and Pythagoras is that they both at this point are only being used in right angled triangles. Okay, so what do you need to know for your GCSE exam? With trigonometry, there's one main thing you need to remember: SOHCAHTOA. You might see it written in various ways, but the main thing it looks like is this. And the reason for that is it stands for something. I'm going to share the whiteboard and let's see if we can write it down. Okay, great. So hopefully you can see my whiteboard and the screen there, and you'll see that I'm going to write down SOHCAHTOA, and that's the main thing. Now, SOHCAHTOA just means sine x equals opposite divided by my hypotenuse. My ka is just my cos or cosine x equals adjacent over my hypotenuse. Now don't panic, I'm going to explain what all these things mean in a minute. And finally my TOA is tan x equals opposite divided by adjacent. Okay, so now you're probably wondering, what on earth is the opposite? What on earth is the adjacent? And what's that hypotenuse thing you're talking about? Well, let's have a go at drawing a triangle and labeling the sides. You can see on the screen here, I'm drawing a right angled triangle. We are going to have an example of an angle here. And that angle is going to be 32 degrees. Okay? We then want to label the sides. Okay? Now, with trigonometry, we use three main sides. We use the opposite, also called O, we use the adjacent, shortened to A, and then we use the hypotenuse, which is C. Hopefully you're familiar with the hypotenuse from the previous part, which is Pythagoras. In this case, the hypotenuse stay the same. So your length is always going to be your longest one for the hypotenuse. It's always going to be opposite your right angles. So just like in Pythagoras, your longest side was the hypotenuse. It's exactly the same with trigonometry. Your longest side that's opposite the right angle is always going to be h. If we get confused about this, we can always just draw a diagonal line up from the right angle to the opposite side, and that tells us where our h is. Then let's move on to O. O is our opposite. This is when we literally draw a line again from our angle we've been given, and it is the opposite side. That means the one that left must be A, the adjacent. The adjacent side is just the one between the angle that we're given and the right angle. O, A, and H. And those three sides come into play at SOHCAHTOA. Okay, so remember with our sine, our SOH It's sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. So this length divided by this length. Our cos is our adjacent divided by our hypotenuse. And our tan is our opposite and adjacent. Now, don't worry if you don't quite understand what sine, cos, or tan is at this point. That's not a problem at all. What I want you to get familiar with is having a go at labeling the different sides of the triangles. So label O, A, and H. Let's use some of the resources from the pack and let's see if you can have a go at labeling them. So hopefully on my screen, you can see 6 triangles currently. There's one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. I'm going to give you some time to label the sides O, A, and H, and then we're going to go through it. So feel free to pause this webinar and annotate them. Okay, so if we go back to the drawings, remember our SOHCAHTOA and our opposites, adjacent, and our hypotenuse. Our adjacent was between the angle we've got and the right angle, and the hypotenuse is the opposite one. So let's do this first one together on the board. You should currently have that for the first one. And this length is T. Now, if we're going to label it, we're going to label our hypotenuse first, and that is the one that's opposite the right angle, and it's always longest. That means it's going to be that side. We're then going to look at our opposite. That is going to be the one opposite the angle that's not the right angle. So that's going to be the length 14. Finally, the last one is going to be A, and that should look like that. Let's go through the rest of them. So for the second one, it looks like this. We should have our hypotenuse here, and that is going to be the longest side. We've got our O here, because remember our O is our opposite, and we have our A up here because our A is adjacent. So that's what you should have for the second one. For the third one, let's do this one together. That's your original triangle, and you should have the hypotenuse there, the opposite there, and the adjacent there. That is because the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle, and it's the longest side. O is always opposite your angle, and A is always adjacent to it. Fabulous. Now let's go back and look at our trigonometry. Okay, so now we figured out that our sine, our SOHCAHTOA, which is our key formula, is opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and then our tan is opposite over adjacent. Let's start using some numbers. Let's plug this in and let's see where we get to. Bear with me on this one, having a little problem drawing the triangle. Ah, there we are. Fabulous. So as you can see, we've got our triangle. Let's have our right angle here. And let's put some angle here. 32, I think we used earlier. So let's use that one again. And I'm going to tell you that this is 5 centimeters long. And I want you to find this length, where the question mark is. Okay, so first things first, we're going to label it. Label it with our H, our O, and our A. So we know this is going to be our H. It's opposite the right angle, and it's our longest side. This side is going to be O. It's opposite the angle they're telling us. So in this case, it's opposite the 32 degrees. Finally, our last side is going to be A. That's our adjacent. That's the one that's next to both the right angle and the other angle we've got. Now, if we remember the magic formula, it was SO, CA, TOA. Now, I always say to students, tick off the ones you've got or the ones you're interested in. So, what do we have or what are we interested in? Well, we've got A, we've got the adjacent, so let's tick that off because we've got it. Then, what are we interested in? Well, we want to find out H, so we're going to tick off H. Now, we circle the one which has the most ticks. Oh, that circle's gone a bit big. But as you can tell, it's the CA. Okay, so we're going to write down CA. And if you can remember what CA stood for, all it stands for is cos x equals adjacent divided by hypotenuse. Now, all we're going to do now is substitute in some of the numbers. So if we've got the adjacent or the hypotenuse or the angle x, which is next to cos, we're going to pop that in. So cos, now x is our angle, that's 32 degrees, they've given it to us here. So we're going to pop that in. Now that equals adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. Well, our adjacent is 5, so we can pop that in. And that is just divided by the hypotenuse. Now the hypotenuse is the bit we don't know, so we're going to leave it as h. Now, what's our next step? Well, here we need to flip the h and the cos around. So it becomes h equals 5 divided by cos 32. Now, if you're not understanding where this comes from, let me draw you a triangle. We can draw these types of triangles for SO, CA, and TOA. A bit like the distance, speed, and time triangles. Okay, now what we do is we just cover up the one we're interested in. So in this case, we're interested in our hypotenuse, which is over here. So we cover that up. And if we got rid of that, we have to do our A divided by our C. And that takes us back to our A, which is 5, divided by our C, which is cos. Now for this bit, we pop it in the calculator. Get your calculator out again, and we're going to do 5 divided by cos 32, like that, and that gives us our answer of 5.89. And voila, there you go. We've worked out our h, which was the missing length, using trigonometry. Hopefully that's cleared things up. Hopefully you have a little bit of an understanding as to how to use trigonometry. Remember, the similarity between Pythagoras is that they both use right angled triangles. The difference for SOHCAHTOA is that it involves an angle, okay? So it involves an angle. Remember SOHCAHTOA and you'll be fine. Until next time, thank you for watching.